I was in my early 20s, living in a small city where the dating scene was slim, but still tempting enough to give apps a shot. After exchanging messages with this guy for a couple of weeks, I finally agreed to meet him. The date itself wasn't terrible. Dinner, light conversation, the usual first date awkwardness. He wasn't exactly charming, but he seemed confident enough that I didn't feel uncomfortable being around him. When the night wound down, he offered to drive me home. I accepted, figuring it would save me the trouble of calling a ride. That's when things took a sharp turn. We were only a few blocks from the restaurant when he pulled a reckless move, cutting across lanes in a way that was both illegal and obviously attention-grabbing. Sure enough, red and blue lights immediately lit up in the rearview mirror. My heart jumped, but I assumed he'd just pull over, take the ticket, and we'd be on our way. Instead, he slammed on the gas. I remember gripping the door handle so tightly my hand went numb. The streetlights blurred as he sped through intersections, ignoring stop signs. I kept saying, "What are you doing? Just pull over." But he was locked in, jaw tight, eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape route. It was the kind of silence that made my skin crawl, like he'd completely forgotten I was even in the car. He eventually whipped the car into a random driveway, killed the lights, and told me to keep quiet. I sat frozen as the sirens grew louder, filling the night air with an electric tension. The silence lasted only seconds before the patrol cars rolled right up behind us, bathing the yard in flashing lights. The officers yanked us both out, cuffing me along with him. I kept insisting I had nothing to do with whatever was happening, but it didn't matter. Procedure was procedure. Standing there under the harsh strobe of red and blue, the cold metal on my wrists, I felt humiliated and terrified all at once. They tore through the car, searching every inch, and that's when I overheard one of the officers mutter something about it being stolen. My stomach sank. Suddenly, the reckless driving made sense, and all I could think about was how easily I could have been seriously hurt, or worse, just for agreeing to that ride. The officers eventually uncuffed me and, surprisingly, gave me a ride home in the back of the cruiser. Meanwhile, my date was hauled off to jail. A few days later, I found out he wasn't just some reckless guy. He had outstanding warrants in another state, and he was extradited almost immediately. I never saw him again, and honestly, I was grateful for that. What started as a casual first date turned into one of the scariest and most surreal nights of my life. I met him about a month before everything went wrong. We matched online, exchanged messages late into the night, and eventually started going out for coffee, dinners, and the occasional movie. At first, he seemed normal, polite, attentive, and even a little shy. He had this calmness about him that made me think he was stable, safe, the kind of guy who wouldn't cause drama. I remember telling a friend, "He's actually one of the more normal ones I've met." That still makes my skin crawl to think about now. After a few weeks, he invited me to stay over at his place for the first time. His house was an older single-story home on a quiet street. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary. Beige siding, trimmed bushes, a little porch light glowing yellow at night. Inside, though, it felt oddly sterile. The living room was neat to the point of discomfort, like no one really lived there. No clutter, no photos on the walls, not even a stray coffee mug in the sink. I brushed it off at the time, thinking maybe he was just a clean freak. That night went by without incident. We watched a movie, ordered takeout, and eventually fell asleep in his bed. But the next morning is when I realized something was very, very wrong. I woke up to him getting dressed for work. He kissed me on the forehead and told me to just relax, that I could sleep in, make some breakfast, and hang out until he got back. Nothing unusual in the way he said it. But when I finally got up and tried to leave the house, I discovered the front door wouldn't open. At first, I thought I was just fumbling with the lock, but then I noticed there wasn't a simple deadbolt. It was a double-cylinder lock that required a key from both sides. And the key, of course, was gone. My stomach twisted. I hurried to the back door. Same thing. The side door, also locked from the outside. Every single exit had been secured in a way that made it impossible to leave without him. When I called him, he answered casually, like nothing was out of the ordinary. That was when he said, in this flat tone that I'll never forget, "You're not allowed to leave the house without me there." It wasn't a joke. He didn't laugh. He just said it like it was a fact, as if I should already know the rule. I remember pacing the living room, every nerve in my body screaming that this was wrong. The blinds were drawn tight, not a sliver of daylight coming in. The house felt more like a cage than a home, silent and airless. I kept running my hand over the locked doorknobs, trying to figure out if I could force one open, but the metal felt cold and absolute. For hours, I sat there, hyper-aware of every sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a wall clock, even my own breathing felt too loud. The longer I stayed trapped, the more I began to picture what kind of person installs locks like this on every door, and why he thought it was okay to treat me like property. I don't want to go into the exact details of how I got out, but eventually I managed to leave. It wasn't simple, and it left me shaking for days afterward. What I remember most vividly, though, is the feeling of stepping out into the daylight again. That rush of fresh air, the normal sounds of traffic down the street, the ordinary world that had kept moving while I sat imprisoned in that house. I never saw him again after that. I blocked his number, avoided the places we used to go, and cut off all contact. But to this day, whenever I walk into someone's house for the first time, I find myself automatically glancing at the locks on the doors, just to make sure. When I was 17, I wasn't exactly the most confident person in the world. I was shy, painfully awkward, the kind of kid who second-guessed every word before speaking. At the time, I was working in a small pub near my town. Most nights, it was the same rotation of regulars. Older guys at the bar, couples ordering dinners, groups of friends stopping in for a few pints. But every now and then, a group of younger people came in, usually loud and laughing, and among them was this girl. She had this way of lighting up the room, not just because she was pretty, but because she carried herself with this confidence I didn't have. Every time she walked in, I'd feel myself tense up, wishing I had the courage to say something, anything, beyond the polite small talk I used at work. Weeks went by like that. I'd steal glances, memorize the sound of her laugh, imagine what it would be like to actually talk to her. And then, one night, I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the end of a long shift. Maybe I was tired of being quiet all the time, but as she was about to leave, I just blurted it out. I asked her if she'd want to go out sometime. She looked surprised, like I'd caught her off guard, but after a pause, she smiled and said yes. My heart was racing. She told me to meet her the next night at another pub across town at 9 o'clock. The next day, I went all out. I didn't just want to show up. I wanted to impress her. I scraped together money for new clothes, borrowed some expensive aftershave from a friend, even picked up flowers and a box of chocolates. It felt like the most important night of my life, and I wasn't going to ruin it by being half-hearted. When I arrived, I spotted her immediately. Only, she wasn't alone. She was sitting with a big group, maybe 7 people in total. Friends, yes, but also her boyfriend, who was sitting right next to her, and his brother. The sight hit me like a punch in the stomach. Still, I walked up, holding the flowers and chocolates like an idiot. The whole group turned to look at me, curious smiles mixed with confusion. Someone asked who I was, and before I could even get a word out, they noticed what I was holding. The question hung in the air. "What's all that for?" I tried to explain, but the words came out as stammering nonsense. My throat felt dry, my face was burning, and every attempt at an answer only made me sound more pathetic. Then, in the smoothest way possible, she cut me off. She smiled, looked at the group, and said, "Oh, he's here to meet my friend Claire." I froze. For a moment, I didn't even process what she'd said. The group turned to look at Claire, who looked just as startled as I felt, but she recovered quickly, offering a polite smile and nodding along like she was in on the plan the whole time. The tension broke into laughter, but not the kind that made me feel included. It was the kind of laughter that left me small and embarrassed, standing there, clutching flowers meant for someone who clearly didn't want them. Still, I sat down, trying to play it off. The group treated me like a new acquaintance, offering drinks and casual conversation, while I just kept my eyes on the table, trying not to look at the girl I'd actually come to see. The whole time, I couldn't stop feeling like I'd walked into a setup, like I was the joke of the night. After a while, Claire stood up, saying she had to head home. I followed her out, partly because I didn't want to stay there any longer, partly because I didn't know what else to do. Once we were outside, she told me they honestly thought I'd wanted to join them for drinks to get to know everyone, and that the way I'd asked had been so rushed and mumbled that they couldn't make sense of it. She wasn't cruel about it. In fact, she was surprisingly kind. She took the flowers and chocolates and even laughed softly when she said she'd actually enjoy them. It didn't feel like pity, more like she was trying to make the whole mess less humiliating. In the end, I didn't get the girl I thought I wanted, but Claire and I did end up going out another night, just the two of us. And strangely enough, I think it worked out better that way. Still, I'll never forget the feeling of walking into that pub, dressed to the nines, holding flowers and chocolates, and realizing I'd been invited into a room full of strangers, one of whom was her boyfriend. That moment has stuck with me ever since, a reminder of how quickly something hopeful can twist into something painful and humiliating.